This is the third in a series of video-based lessons that will introduce relational databases and database programming with Visual Basic. You will get a feel for development of database application programs that are at the core of today's modern information systems. This material can be found in Chapter 10 of the textbook. For those of you that have taken or are currently taking IDSC 3103 Data Management and Databases course, the introduction to databases will be a brief refresher. Even if you did not take this class, however, don't worry. We will go over the basic relational database concepts and discuss the few major database management systems. In IDSC 3103, we interacted with databases directly through DBMSs using the so-called non-procedural access. This allowed us to design and run queries, sometimes without the need for coding, but more often writing the needed SQL code. In this part of IDSC 3102 Intermediate Programming, we're going to exercise the procedural access to the database through Visual Basic Code as well as SQL scripts embedded in that VB code. We will begin our Intro to Visual Basic Database Programming with data source configuration, which means establishing the connection between the VB project and our relational database. We will discuss data binding and data adapters, providing the bridge between the database on one hand and data sets/data tables where the results from our queries will be temporarily stored on the other. Excuse me. We will use list boxes and data grid views to display the results of the queries to the user, and while we will mostly query a single table, we will illustrate the more challenging applications that need more complex, multi-table queries to accomplish required tasks. The data and databases are everywhere in today's modern information systems. Airline reservation systems, hospital patient management systems, bank trading systems, and all sorts of other business functions and processes would be impossible without a modern database and at the center of these information systems. So what is a database? A database is a collection of related tables representing entities like customers and orders engaged in a variety of business processes like customers placing orders. A database table is a rectangular array of data with columns, also known as fields, representing different characteristics of an entity. So, customer table columns would include things like last name, first name, age, gender, etc., including customer ID, a specialized column/field used to uniquely identify each customer the organization interacts with. Each row, also known as record, is a collection of data of the same type for each of the customers, i.e. the actual customer last name and first name, age, gender, etc. Database management software, or DBMS, is a collection of software tools used to manage relational databases, from creating tables and users by database developers and administrators to running queries and publishing reports by regular database users. Some of the more well-known DBMSs are Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, MySQL, and IBM's DB2 at the enterprise level, as well as Microsoft Access and FileMaker at the desktop level. There are many others, and it is important to realize that all modern programming languages like Java, Python, C++, etc., as well as VB, can interact with any of these DBMSs. A set of open database connectivity, or DBC technologies, assure us that we can develop a database application in any programming language on any database platform, leading to a significant diversity of approaches and solutions. We're going to start our hands-on portion of this video series by starting a new VB project called Sports Test. We're going to save it in the lectures folder under 02 databases, and then we're going to go through the steps of data source configuration wizard outlined on this in the following slide. In a nutshell, we want to add a binding source control from data group and use its data source property to add project data source of type database and with dataset model. All this will allow us to establish a direct connection between the VB project, our database application, and the database itself. So what we're going to do is go through the configuration wizard, and one of the steps is going to be creating a new connection to the Microsoft Access database, sportinggoods.accdb in the lectures folder specifically. And after the database connection is successful, we will save the database connection string. We'll select all the tables to be included in this connection, and then we're going to use data member property of that binding source connection to select the customer table, which will then create a customer table adapter object to connect to the sporting goods data set and establish the connection between the VB project on one hand and the database on the other. We will then continue by binding additional tables, not in this particular intro project, but the one that I already sort of have pre-prepared. So we're going to create the adapters and data sources to other tables in the database, namely orders, order details, and products. We'll skip employees because we're not going to use them. And then we're going to sort of show the entire database and how it looks from within the VB project. Okay, so this slide, data binding slide, the data source configuration slide, and database programming slide, which are slides 5, 6, and 7, you should sort of think of as a reference to what I'm about to do in Visual Basic. Okay, so I need to start my Visual Basic project first. Okay, it's going to be just a new project. All right, it's a standard Windows application. We're going to call it Sports Test. We are really not going to use it again. It's going to be just a project used for this intro video, and we're going to make sure that we view the toolbar. The toolbox once we get in. So, as you recall from the beginning of the class, as well as the obviously IDSC 3101 intro to programming class, most of the time we use these common controls like buttons, check boxes, labels, text boxes, list boxes, and so forth. Right here, we're going to use, in addition to data grid view, which will also be used in the project later on. Not, again, not this one, but the one I have pre-prepared. There is a binding source control that's going to be used to create this connection between the VB project and the database. So you drag it and drop it onto the form, and shows up in this tray right below it called binding source 1. We could give it a name, but it's not terribly important. You go to the properties of the binding source, and under data source you click on the drop down to connect to add the project data source, since there is none at the moment. Okay, and this essentially starts with data configuration. These are described on those slides 5 and 6 and 7. We'll choose a database that we'll get the data from. Obviously, the dataset model is the only one, and we're going to create a new connection to the Microsoft Access database file. OLEDB is also important to remember, because this acronym, object linking and embedding DB, obviously database, will be used later on, or referenced I should say later on. It's important to notice that obviously there are other types of data sources or databases, namely Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, okay, as well as MySQL database we could connect to. But right now we're just going to have a simple desktop Microsoft Access database file, which we browse for. It's going to be in the databases lectures right here, Sporting Goods. I am again going to use slides and scripts version. It's the same database. There is no passwords or usernames, so just click OK to make the connection. Click Next, and then when it asks us whether we want to add this database to the project, yes we do. The connection string is predefined, and it's fine, and then we go next to retrieve the database information. The dataset name will automatically be created as Sporting Goods data set, just like the connection string was Sporting Goods data string. And again, we want to include all the tables, all 5 tables, although we really won't use any of them in this particular project, but we will in the next one, all but the employee table. Okay. Finishing should establish that connection. You'll notice the Sporting Goods data set is dropped onto the tray, okay, and that is essentially our data source for this binding source. So this is the Sporting Goods data set that sort of you should think of it as residing within the project, which is then bound through this binding source control, data member property, to the customer table in this particular case in the actual sporting goods database. So you can see the customer table adapter gets dropped to it. Okay, if you want to bind, if you want to connect essentially to other tables, you're going to have to add more of these binding sources, binding source 2, binding source 3, and then end up with an order table adapter, order detail table adapter, as well as product table adapter, which are already defined in the sort of prepared project I'm going to use in the next few videos. Okay, right now there is really nothing else to do but maybe review the database itself. The sporting goods data set has an extension XSD, and it's stored in the project file. If you take a look at it right here, okay, I'm not sure. I don't think I actually saved it, so I'm going to save this sporting tests in that script folder. You don't really even have to save it. It's just illustrating how it goes through how to go through this configuration process. Now it's here. The sporting goods table got copied into the project. This is the sporting goods data set. That's the someplace here, that XLD file, or what is it? XSD file. And the sporting goods, if you double click on the sporting goods database in the solution explorer, you're going to pop up here into Server Explorer. You'll see the same database tables: customer, employee, order detail, and product. I think this is enough for this. I'm going to switch back to the presentation, move to the next script, which is going to start our next video, and pause.